Good afternoon. Today I'm talking to John Nicholl. Good afternoon, John. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your books, and your journey to becoming a writer.
Yeah, I should be able to do that. Obviously, my name is John Nicholl. Tell you a bit about myself. I'm married, been married for 39 years. I know that because we've just had our anniversary. So I can't be allowed to forget that. That wouldn't be a good move. Got 3 adult children, 2 of whom are in West Wales, and a daughter in London who married a detective in London after going to university in that part of the world. And I've got 2 grandchildren as well, 1 boy and 1 girl, who are both brilliant. I've written 10 books, all of which have been published by Bloodhound Books. Some have been made into audiobooks. Some have been translated into other languages. 4 are going to be published in the Czech language over the next few months, which is great for me. All the books are psychological thrillers, fairly dark psychological thrillers. I worked as a young police officer and then as a child protection social worker. Ended up heading up the service for Carmarthenshire in West Wales before leaving and starting to write. So all the books draw on the experiences I had at that time, really, during my career. So rather than research, I tend to write from real life experiences. So the books are fictional, but they pull in different events and bits of different people that I actually encountered over the sort of 20-year career. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Did you always want to be a writer?
No. It's a strange story, really. It happened almost by accident. Going back about 7 years ago, I was talking to a psychologist about the psychological impact of child protection work on workers, both people I knew and myself as well. I knew quite a few child protection social workers and police officers who were still having a tough time years on after some of the things they'd investigated. So it was something that was pretty close to my heart, really. And obviously it had a psychological impact on me as well, which I'm not immune, same as everyone else. So the psychologist suggested writing some of my experiences down. So I started doing that, and that diary of sorts gradually became first book. So what was a factual diary was fictionalized into a story, and that's the first book, which was called White is the Coldest Color. It took about 2 years to write that one, because as I said, I never thought it would actually become a book, leave alone be published and sell as many as it has. So it just happened, really, and I found I quite liked doing it, and was getting a good response from people who were reading it, and it went on from there.
How do you decide sort of what stories from your career to write about?
I've usually got a very rough idea of the first couple of pages, but then the story develops as I write it. So when I'm starting a book, I don't really know what it's going to be about. And as I'm going along, I don't know what's going to be in the next chapter until that chapter comes. So I know some authors plan a whole story out, they know what the ending's going to be, but I generally haven't got a clue. That's just the way it works best for me, really.
Yeah, you're not the only one, and it
No,
still amazes me.
I've talked to other people, and weirdly, it's almost as if someone else is dictating it to me. That probably sounds crazy.
I heard it before. The first time it sounded crazy. Now I'm just used to it.
Yeah, yeah,
Perfectly normal.
thing, but it really is like that. And sometimes I'll be lying in bed or just watching telly or something, and something will come into my head saying, "Oh, you need to change that sentence," and it might be in the middle of the book or anywhere in the book, but I can then go straight to it. And sometimes it's something as simple as the structure of a sentence needs to change, or something is factually wrong. Or so I really don't know how it happens, but it does. Yeah.
Were you ever a big reader?
Yeah, I've read a lot over the years. Yeah, there's a few books from years back that I really loved. Things like I don't know if have you read Midnight Express?
No, I didn't think so.
It's the story of a guy. What's his story really? He was arrested in Turkey, smuggling drugs, and although it was hashish, marijuana, he ended up with a life sentence as a very young man. There's the story of his experience in a Turkish prison, his escape, and then it got made into an Oscar-winning film. That's one of the books I truly loved as a young guy, and got me reading really. And I was interested in other stuff, particularly police stuff. I was a young policeman at the time. There's another book I'm searching for. I'm hearing myself coming back when I'm talking to you all of a sudden.
I'm still here.
Are we okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm hearing my own voice for some reason as I'm speaking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it had a bit of a wobble, I think, but I think it's fine now.
Okay. Yeah, that got me into a film as well, with Al Pacino playing the lead character. But it's about a guy a real life story about a guy in New York Police Department dealing with corruption. And that guy, bizarrely, ended up living in Wales. This New York, yeah. And Billy, the guy who wrote Midnight Express, he had a Welsh girlfriend. He's actually married to someone else entirely now. But I've got to know him in recent months. And if someone had told me sort of 30 years ago, when I first read the book, "Oh, you'll end up knowing this guy," funny what life looks out.
Yeah. What about now? Do you read much now? Are there any authors now that you look up to or enjoy?
Oh, there's lots to look up to. I mean, I read The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho. Is that book? Loved that book. Completely different to anything I'd write. I couldn't ever write something like that. It's so different to the stuff I do. But I thought it was fantastic. And I read a book recently called Castaway by Lucy Irwin, which again is a bit of a theme developing here, I think, because that's a true life story as well. It's basically about a girl who responds to an advert in a newspaper. A guy's advertising for a wife to go and live on a remote island in the Tasman Sea.
Wow.
She ends up on this island with this much older guy. It doesn't go particularly well, really, but it makes for an interesting story. So I really enjoyed that one. And there is a guy who's another guy, a Welsh friend actually, a guy called Phil Rowland. I read his book recently. It's called Sienna. Phil mainly does script writing. He directs for TV as well. Recently had a 3-part drama on TV called Butterfly Breath, I think. But his stuff, I read his book and thought it was great. Really enjoyed that one. I mean, there's any number of great writers. I mentioned Andy, and Bloodhound Books have signed so many good writers. But I'm finding, because I'm writing crime fiction, the honest truth is I'm tending to read other stuff. A lot of historical biography, particularly stuff around World War II, I find it interesting. My dad was combat soldier in World War II. He was started at 19, leading troops in Japan, which seems insane, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So that period really interests me, and I also enjoy things like Bill Bryson, the travel writer, his stuff, Walk in the Woods, and yeah, I really enjoy that stuff.
They're my generally they're my go-to if I want something light. They're just hilarious. I love Bill Bryson's books.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
Have you seen the film of A Walk in the Woods?
No, I haven't. I really want to, actually.
I think it's Nick Nolte and Robert Redford. Robert Redford plays Bryson, and then Nick Nolte plays the friend, whose his name escapes me, but he does appear in a few of the books. And the film works brilliantly. It's well worth a watch.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely have to keep an eye out for that then. Yeah, I've read all Bill Bryson's books, even the sort of non-fiction ones.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I've read one where he travels around to Europe as a young guy. That was great. And I think one where he was traveling around Britain.
Yeah, Notes from a Small Island, I think.
Yeah, that's the one, yeah. And
I know my Bill Bryson.
He actually mentions Tenby in that book, where my mum and dad used to live. And I think he says something along the lines of it was the prettiest place he'd been in the UK. And it really is. If you haven't been there, it's really well worth a visit. Yeah,
I haven't actually, but I will put it on my wish list.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Honestly, it's got basically a walled town. It's actually expanded now outside the walls as well. But the original walls of the town are still there, and it's a really lovely harbour and several really cracking beaches. Really pleasant place.
Yeah, it sounds like it, especially when you live in a town with no sea.
Yeah. Okay.
What was I going to ask? It's interesting actually that you say about reading crime, because that's come up quite a lot recently. I think Tony Ford has started the discussion, but he said that he couldn't read what he writes. So yeah, it was.
Yeah, I think. Let me just close the door. Hold on. I think part of writing is escapism, isn't there? So I think sometimes we tend to read things which are outside of our own experience. So for me, because I spent 20 odd years investigating that stuff, and having to deal with some pretty awful cases, both in a direct way as an investigator, but also in managing more complex cases as my career developed. I think then to read about it, I mean, when I'm writing it, in a way, it's almost self-therapeutic, because you're getting the stuff out. And it makes me laugh sometimes when reviewers will sometimes say something like, "Oh, that's so unrealistic," or "That could never happen." And I'm sort of sitting there thinking, "Oh God, if only that were true." Mm-hmm. Sadly, a lot of the stuff that they're saying couldn't happen or wouldn't happen has happened, and has been seen to happen. So yeah. So writing the stuff I find helps me. Helps me deal with some of the memories which were perhaps best forgotten, if such things were possible. If you could press rewind and delete,
Yeah.
That's not in this world. So yeah, so writing it helps me get out of my system, but I think reading it, I certainly would never read my own books, that's for sure. And reading other people's crime books, although I do, if someone asks me to, you know, like you get requests, will you read this for me, or do you mind reading this? Then I'll say yes, and I'll leave reviews for people, honest reviews, obviously. But I wouldn't sort of necessarily pick up a crime book and read it for pleasure otherwise. But that's the truth.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I read what's now The Sisters, and in that there was vigilante justice. Is that something that you think's going to happen more, especially because of the, you know, the law around women abuse and stuff?
I think that's a difficult one. It's certainly true that the legal system is failing a lot of women. You only have to look at some of the statistics around rape, for example, but also domestic violence, to see that the vast majority of alleged perpetrators aren't being prosecuted, and the number of being successfully convicted is real. Well, it's small. You know, it's incredibly disappointing, really. And the fact is, it's got worse rather than better. You know, you'd hope that over time services would improve, but it's actually gone the other way. So there's less people being successfully convicted for those sort of offences now than in percentage terms than ever before. So I completely understand if somebody felt betrayed by the system and wanted some sort of revenge, like is happening in the book, The Sisters. But in my experience of working with survivors, usually what they want is protection and justice rather than revenge. Although having said that, I did deal with one case with one very angry female survivor, completely understandably angry because she'd been subjected to some pretty ghastly stuff by this guy. And she did exact her revenge very effectively. But that was very much a one-off from my experience of working with those types of cases. So I can understand why the women and the sisters, or women like the women in the sisters would do what they do in the story. And I know there have been cases around the world where women have taken revenge on a violent partner or ex-partner. So I can understand it, but at the same time, you have to say that if people act outside of the law, then where does that lead you? I guess it's anarchy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one. I know in the book, there's a group of women, you've read it, so you know, but for other people, there's a group of angry women who feel fundamentally let down, really, by the police, by the CPS, by the courts. So they're living this life, they're in a domestic violence refuge, they're having to consider their safety constantly. Some of them are scared to go out on the street in case they meet the wrong person, etc. And at the same time, you've got their abusers who are fairly carefree and are getting on with their lives without fear. So yeah, I completely understand why a group of women like that would say to themselves, well, that this just isn't fair, it's not right, and we've got to do something about it. And in the story, as you know, they certainly do.
Yes, they certainly do.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting. As part of my degree, I've studied the justice system,
Okay.
In inverted commas, because it just isn't. But we had discussions about whether we would want to be, to have an eye for an eye sort of justice. And actually it comes out generally that people don't. They just want the justice system to work properly, and it doesn't.
And it doesn't, no.
Generally, one of the...
There's a famous saying, isn't there, about the eye for an eye thing. I think it was a Gandhi. Eye for an eye makes the world blind.
Yeah.
And that's it, isn't it? It's revenge, and where does it stop?
One of the best books I've ever read, although I had to keep putting it down because it kept making me so angry, was The Secret Barrister. And I knew the justice system was broken, but when I read that, I didn't realise quite how broken. And yeah, I genuinely had to keep putting it down because I was just fuming. But it's very good. The guys on Twitter actually that wrote it has wrote another one now. But yeah, it makes you realise, just don't ever get in trouble. Don't ever get into the court system because you're screwed.
It's a lottery. Yeah, I know. I've given evidence loads of times, and it's almost a game, really. And it's often got very little to do with what actually happened. It's far more to do with what you can prove. So, even people who are found not guilty, it doesn't necessarily mean they haven't done it. All it means is that it couldn't be. I mean, perhaps they haven't. Perhaps they didn't. But on the other hand, perhaps there just wasn't sufficient evidence to prove they did. So it's a difficult one, really.
Very much weighted towards the rich in society that can afford the better lawyers that can argue their way out of a hole.
Yeah. That is so true. I mean, if you can afford a QC, then your chances are of getting off are massively increased. Yeah, and if you're unlucky enough to be able to end up with someone who's relatively new and not necessarily that skilled, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, it was eye-opening.
I mean, you could be talking about many thousands of pounds a day for a good QC. So, you have to be pretty well off.
Yeah, we were taken to magistrates and a Crown Court for uni. And I mean, I'm a bit older than the rest of my group, but we all agreed it was like a game, that we're sitting there in their wigs and their gowns and stuff. And it's like, what is this? We're in the 21st century. This is crazy.
Yeah. I guess you got to ask them, what system is better? There's no perfect system.
Not the American system, for sure. That is.
Yeah, it's a good example. I mean, perhaps the way we do it, it's far from perfect, but perhaps it's as good as it can get, perhaps.
Yeah, until they give it more money, the same as everything else.
Yeah. I mean, with the work I was doing, I mean, obviously you give evidence yourself, but also I was in situations where children were having to give evidence against an alleged perpetrator. And although in the later years it was being done by a video link, that was even worse, really, because you had kids, some very young kids, being put through really, really rigorous interviews by some very skilled barristers. And that was quite hard to watch at times.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the child's court when we were there, and I mean, it's still a courtroom, and I can't imagine it would be any less daunting just because they've taken away, certain aspects of the normal courtroom. I can't even imagine.
That's still incredibly tough. I mean, we were involved with one case, a ring case where there were multiple perpetrators, where some of the child victims who were very young, because the alleged offenders, they were convicted after, so now they are obviously known abusers rather than alleged. But because each of them had their own barrister, the child witnesses didn't only have to be interviewed by one barrister, but by several in turn. And in a couple of cases, that process literally went on for hours. So it's just, the system is far from perfect. And that's an extreme case. I mean, the vast majority of cases weren't anything like that. But this conversation, that sprung to mind, really. It's something that, yeah, it was quite hard to accept at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do your wife and your kids read your books?
I'm laughing. I don't think my kids would ever read them. So, yeah, my daughter has read a couple, actually, thinking about it. Yeah. She read White is the Coldest Colour, which she didn't like very much because she found it too upsetting. And I get that. And then she read When Evil Calls Your Name, which is a first-person book written as a woman in prison, having experienced domestic violence. And she's basically writing a diary of what happened and why and how. And she really liked that one. My wife's always the first person to read all the books. So she's probably my biggest critic, I suspect. Yeah. There's no danger of me getting big-headed, that's for sure.
Does she ever worry about what's going on in your head after reading them?
No, I mean, we've been together a long time, and she knows the work I used to do. And some of the stuff, I used to come home and sometimes talk about. So, no, I think she understands.
Oh, that's good. Is there absolutely any no-go areas for you? Because you're already writing about tough stuff, so.
Yeah, I'd never describe, like I write about, as you say, dark things, the sort of stuff I used to work with, but I'm careful how I do it. So, for example, with White is the Coldest Colour, which is the story of a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist who's also a predatory paedophile, and involved in running a paedophile ring. Although that is talked about, obviously, because that's what the book is about, and a particular child that man targets. I would never, ever describe any of the crimes. So I would never ever describe a sexual crime against a woman or child. So I think it's unnecessary, gratuitous. It's just, I wouldn't want to read it, and I wouldn't want to write it. So that's something I would stay well clear of. And I'd also be very sure to write it in a condemning way, so that it's crystal clear what angle it was being written from. Very much on the side of the victim, very much on the side of the police, and very anti the offender. So although that book and other books do cover some horrendous events, those events against women and children are never described. Although in some of the books, there's one called, I'm forgetting the title of my own books now. Before I Met Him, yeah, that's it. That's a book about a girl who was sexually abused as a child, was let down by the system, and it then moves on to her as an adult wanting revenge on the man who she believes wrecked her life, and to a large extent did. So in that and other books, I describe in detail the offences against the perpetrator, men who are abusers. Some of them suffer fairly horribly in some of the books. And that's described in some graphic detail, but never offences against the women or children.
I don't think readers will mind that anyway. I think they'll quite enjoy the perpetrators suffering.
Yeah, I enjoy writing that bit of it, yeah.
I can imagine. Would you consider writing in any other genres?
I've written in different styles. Most of the books are written conventionally, and then, like I mentioned, When Evil Calls Your Name is written as a woman, which I was a bit unsure about doing. So I didn't know how people would respond in trying to understand how a female would think as a male. So that was quite a leap for me, but I think it worked. I know some reviewers have actually thought the book was written by a woman, which I guess is the biggest compliment, given that it's a woman's voice. So yeah, that was a big departure. And the one I'm writing now is similar, actually. I'm about a third of the way into it. And that's another first person book with a woman writing, telling the reader the story of her life. Which, strangely enough, is another book in which she's become a vigilante as a result of her own experiences. So yeah, I guess there's another theme developing there.
What's been your favourite moment as an author so far?
There's been lots. I mean, the first book, as I say, I never thought it would be a book at all. And there were some disasters along the way. I self-published it initially. And computers weren't my greatest skill. I was never that great with technical things. I've got a bit better now, but going back to then, I really wasn't that great. And I just changed from Microsoft to Apple. So it was completely new to me. And I was having to convert files from Apple Pages to Word because people were asking for them in the Word format. And because I was self-publishing, I had to send a Word file to the formatter. And an early draft rather than the edited and proofread version. Yeah. Even now I'm thinking, oh my God. And I didn't know I'd done that. I didn't have a clue that I'd done this. So it came back and I thought it was all fine. And I uploaded it to Amazon and it was published, this early draft. Unbelievably, the book, it's so unlikely for a self-published book, but it went straight into the Amazon top 100 within days. I was sort of celebrating, obviously this is all good. And then reviewers started pointing out the flaws. I thought, what the hell is going on? And that's when I realized that I'd uploaded the wrong version. Oh my God. So I really thought I'd blown that even before I started, really. But and worse than that, the good version was actually on the old computer, which was now completely beyond repair. So I couldn't retrieve it. So a guy, one of the guys who pointed out in no uncertain terms that the book needed some work, happened to be a proofreader. So he rescued this early draft for me, really. So I then uploaded the corrected version, and I was unbelievably lucky because it started selling in crazy numbers, and it ended up as a #1 bestseller in 5 countries, which, so I went from thinking, oh my God, I've blown it completely before I even started, to about 2 or 3 weeks later, I was had these Amazon bestseller badges in several categories. I think it was the USA, the UK, Canada, Australia, and Spain. I still don't get Spain, but there we are. So yeah, that was a great moment, because it was like disaster turned into a good moment. Yeah, that was great. There was a moment which really touched my heart as well. That was in Cardiff, actually. We were in a restaurant, and one of the waitresses came up, and she'd read White is the Coldest Colour, which by that stage, the self-published version had been unpublished, and a re-edited version had been published by Bloodhound. Oh, someone opening the door. The waitress had recognised me from social media, which hardly ever happens. I think it's probably 3 or 4 times in the last 6 years. But she'd read the book, recognised me, and she came over. And at the start of the book, it warns people that it contains content that some people might find upsetting from the start, and also says that it's dedicated to survivors. So basically, she came over, said, I hope you don't mind me saying, I've read your book. I'm feeling a bit tearful just saying it, actually. She said she was one of the survivors that it was dedicated to. And that's
when you know it's worthwhile, then, don't you? That's what it's for, isn't it?
Yeah, she said she was glad I'd written it, which was nice to hear, because a part of me did worry about that, that it might be a trigger for some people with flashbacks, etc.
Yeah. But quite a few people have sent messages actually saying to me that they've experienced those things and they were glad I'd written it. So that's meant a lot. And then more recently, just the fact, doing things like this with you and just getting my name out there, really. Daily Express wrote a lovely review with the sisters, which was just before Christmas. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it was amazing.
Which was lovely. Very touching, really. And I did an interview with Lynn Bowles, who I think you commented on it.
Horribly.
Yeah, she used to be on Radio 2 with Ken Bruce.
Oh, yeah.
They had the banter going. Yeah, so I did an interview with her after the Express review, which was a good experience. I think it was my 3rd one on the radio. And I had a contact from the main Welsh newspaper, which is the Western Mail. It's sort of national newspaper of Wales. A couple of days ago, went in to do an interview and do a review with the sisters. So for some reason, the sisters seems to be getting more national coverage than I've had before, which is, for someone like me, that's pleasing, really.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, it's a good book, so.
Thank you.
That's all right.
There is, I haven't actually talked to anyone about it. There is possibility, it's only a small possibility, but there's a possibility of it doing something with television as well. So it's a sort of watch this space situation, but I did have a conversation with a script writer and director within Wales a few days ago, who thinks that the book would work well for television. So it's at very, very early stages, and it may well come to nothing, but yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, it was one of my early questions was whether the authors wanted their books to be made to TV or film, and the answer was always yes.
Of course, I know several who've had some really great deals in the last year. Deservedly so, fantastic books. I think there's one called The Perfect Marriage, which is a Bloodhound book, which is been bought by the rights have been bought by one of the major film companies, and that I'm sure that'll be brilliant. And one of my author friends, Drida, I don't know if you know Drida Say Mitchell, a lovely person and a great writer. And some of her stuff has been optioned for TV, which is fantastic. I'm sure that'll be brilliant too. So yeah, it happens for people. So who knows? Fingers crossed.
One of the other Welsh authors said that it was all the authors in the Northeast that were controlling the charts, and now it's turned for the Welsh.
Well, there are
so perhaps you're leading the charge.
Quite right too. Yeah, there's a few good Welsh writers, yeah, and some of whom don't get nearly as much attention as they deserve, really. That always amazes me, that number of authors I know who write fantastic books, but who sell very, very few. And I wonder sometimes how they keep going with it all, because they write book after book and they're good books and there's absolutely nothing wrong with them, but they just don't sell. And it can be as simple as being with a publisher who just isn't very good at marketing.
That's why I like doing this, because I've read the big names and then I read the indie authors, and I think that their stuff is as good as or better than some of these so-called big names, and it frustrates me that they're not as popular.
Yeah, I completely.
There's some incredible stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the reality is now there's literally thousands of books published every week. So the chance of, like what happened for me with White, where self-published book, which I hadn't even published the right bloody version, and then all of a sudden it's a bestseller. I mean, that is so unlikely. I was so lucky. And people like yourself, book bloggers, were a massive part of that. You know, the first person ever to review it, do you know Sue Ward?
Yeah, I know rings a bell, yeah.
I think her blog's called Read Along with Sue. Well, I didn't even know book bloggers existed, to be honest. That's just how naive I was. But she contacted me and said, "Oh, I quite fancy the book. Will you send me a copy?" And I nearly didn't. But thank God I did. Thank God I did, because that was the start of it all for me, really. I mean, she wrote a cracking review, and then loads of other book bloggers got on board, and all of a sudden, a lot of them were reviewing the book. And if that hadn't happened, I don't think I'd have ever written another one. I probably would never have got I mean, White got me a literary agent. I signed with a guy called Toby Mundy, who founded Atlantic Books. It got me my first publishing deal, because the then publicity manager for Bloodhound Books happened to read it. So I hadn't submitted to publishers or anything, you know. Sarah Hardy, that's the lady. She's a book blogger too, although I don't know if she's still doing it, but she wrote some fantastic reviews. She just happened to read the book, and she thought it was well, she liked it, put it that way. And that's how I ended up with a publishing deal. So it all happened, you know, fortuitously, but without much planning from me, really.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you must have quite a loyal support group of readers and bloggers and stuff.
Yeah, I'm incredibly fortunate with that. I've got an art group. I think you're in it, aren't you? Yeah. I've got an art group on Facebook, which I think there's about 70 people in it now. And that's it. There's no room for any more, really. But They're fantastic, yeah, and so supportive and helpful, and they'll tell me if there's something that isn't right, you know, with a new book, which matters, because you can read a book 100 times and still miss stuff. So yeah, they're great. I don't know what I'd do without them, to be honest.
It's quite a supportive community, isn't it? The authors and the bloggers seem to be quite helpful to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being a part of that, certainly for people like me, it's crucial to success. Because you're so reliant on reviews, as certainly, you know, unless you happen to be Lee Child or J.K. Rowling or somebody, you know, you're so reliant on reviews and people getting the word out there. Because there's a sea of books, so for yours to stand out and sell well, you really need help. It's not going to happen otherwise. Yeah. But yeah, I think certainly all the authors I know, the successful ones anyway, are really grateful for that support.
Apart from publishing the wrong edition of your book, what's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you? I told you they wouldn't all be easy questions.
Oh dear, yeah. Okay. Well, there's any number of things really. Yeah, I think that was probably the most embarrassing thing I've experienced, because it was so public. There was one. This is many years ago, when I was a very young copper. I can remember going to a house. We had to get into this house for a particular reason, and yeah, bang 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 bang, no answer. Break the door down, and we were supposed to be next door. Wrong house. Yeah, so that was a good one.
Whoops.
Whoops, yeah. Yeah. The whole wrong book thing was worse, because it was so public, and uploading the right version, nothing happens instantly. It takes days from when you upload it to when it goes live. So I was literally selling hundreds of, oh God, it was awful. I was selling several hundred copies a day, knowing that everyone was getting the crap version. Oh God. Yeah. So I remember we were in Cardiff at the time when I realised, funny enough, at Cardiff Bay, staying at the hotel I mentioned earlier. So, and I remember just sort of talking to my wife the whole time about what was happening, driving absolutely around the bend. So, oh my God, it like sold another 100. Oh no. Normally you'd be delighted. Everyone's going to see it's full of mistakes.
I hope she reminds you of that every now and then, just to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, yeah, she does occasionally. Yeah.
And good stuff.
Yeah, it's. I mean, they're all still there. Obviously, the bad reviews, they don't go away. But fortunately now there's quite a few hundred good ones, so we're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were to have a dinner party and invite 4 famous people, then who are you going to invite?
Oh dear, these are very hard questions to come up with.
I warned you. I said they wouldn't all be nice.
I'll invite you for this one.
Oh, thank you. You're only the second person that I've spoke to that would invite me. Not that I'm famous.
Okay, I better invite my wife. That would probably be good.
Yeah.
She won't be happy otherwise.
Yes.
Who would I invite? I really don't know. I really like Andrew Dale. You know, the political interviewer. I think he's a really interesting guy. I'd quite like to talk to him. author-wise, maybe Billy Hayes, Midnight Express guy, because I've talked to him a lot online, but we've never actually met, so that would be good fun to actually get together. And perhaps someone from the world of boxing, someone like Tyson Fury. So I'm massively into combat sports. That was like a big part of my life as well, which is another part. But yeah, perhaps something like that.
Interesting mixture.
Yeah. Well, I think a bit of diversity is interesting. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to mix with people from. If you only mix with people who are the same as you never learn anything or grow. That's what I found. Whereas if you mix with people who are different interests and perspectives, then I think that's got to be a good thing, really.
Absolutely. A couple of people asked questions online, if I can find them. I think I've already asked one. I should have had this ready, shouldn't I?
That's okay.
Valerie asked, is there anything you wouldn't write about, which you've answered?
Yeah,
Livia asked, do you prefer to write standalones or would you like to write a series?
Well, I've done both, really. So it doesn't really. I know the sort of conventional wisdom is that series sell better, but I haven't necessarily found that to be the case. I think if people like a book, they'll buy it anyway, whether it's a standalone or a series. So I don't think it matters to me, really. Although I do like involving some of the same characters. Gareth Gravel appears in 6 of the books. And then more recently, there's Detective Inspector Laura Kesey. My daughter's name's Laura, so that's where that's come from. Kesey comes from the author who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Okay.
Which is one of my favourites. Loved the film, and it's a good book too. So I quite like involving some of the same characters and developing a relationship between them and the other characters in the book, so that I can anyway read them all. I don't think it matters what order they read them, really. Although some people may disagree, but
yeah, I might do OCD to read things out of order. I can't do it. I have to read them in order.
Okay. Well, it probably is best, but I don't think it would hugely matter if someone picked one up and read it in isolation.
Livia, don't know how to pronounce her surname, also asked, if you were to collaborate with another author, who would it be?
I can't come up with a name, but I do quite like the idea of writing with a female author, doing alternative chapters, like one chapter perhaps as the perpetrator or the police, and then the contrasting chapters written by the other person as the survivor of the subject of the investigation, perhaps something like that.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
And like I was saying, I said a bit about earlier, I like the idea of working with somebody who's skilled at script writing. But I know that's something I couldn't do. So some sort of collaborative project where I could input into the script, but wouldn't actually be writing it. Someone with more skilled at that side of things could do it. So that may happen, hopefully. We'll see.
And then Valerie Dickinson wanted to know what's next.
I'm contracted to write one more book for Bloodhound, which is the one I'm writing now, which will be published in the summer. I'm a fantastic publisher, and I'm very, very happy with them. It'll be my 11th book with them then. But I don't know what I'm going to do after that, really, whether or not I'll have another contract and write more books, or perhaps go in another direction. I'm not sure.
What was I just going to ask you? And then I've forgotten again. Literally just forgotten.
Oh, don't worry. I do the same thing all the time.
Distracted me. It's your fault on this. It's not my fault.
No, it's always the man's fault. I've learned that in life.
Yeah, I imagine you have, after being married for nearly 40 years.
It's always best. It's easier life. Yes, it's my fault.
No, women are just as bad. We're worse, actually, probably, if anything.
I'm not going to comment.
It's fine. I know it's fine.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be wise, no. Yeah. I've worked with so many women over the years. Is the first social work team I worked in, I was the only man as a young guy. We just after leaving the place. So I'm well experienced at working with ladies. So I definitely know when to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And been married for as long as I have taught me that as well. So.
We were talking before about the sort of literary festivals and stuff. If they all go ahead this year, would you go to any?
There is, I'm in a group called Crime Cymru, which is a bit like Bloody Scotland. It's a group of Welsh crime writers who we're trying to up the profile of Welsh crime writing. And there's a first Crime Cymru literary festival in May. It was going to be in Aberystwyth, but sadly now it's going to be online because of the whole COVID thing, although I'm sure it'll still be great. So yeah, I'll be a part of that. I have done a few over the years, sort of thing. I think probably 5 or 6. But I think I prefer the social side to the work side of it.
I get the impression everyone else does as well, from what I've seen.
I think so. I was supposed to be going to Prague because 4 of the books have been done in the Czech language, which I mentioned earlier. A Czech publisher bought the rights and is due to publish. I was supposed to be going to the book fair in Prague, which I was obviously delighted about. It's a really good one, apparently. But now it's not going to happen because of COVID. So, in fact, it's ruined 2 trips for me. I was supposed to be going to Florida as well for a book award thing.
Wow.
It's called Colour Won an Award, and there was going to be an award ceremony, and so it seemed like a good excuse to go for a nice holiday in the sun, really. But that can't happen now either. So.
Yeah. Oh.
2 planned trips that have been knocked on the head.
Yeah, that really sucks, actually.
Yeah, there we go. Some people are putting up with a hell of a lot worse. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you got to put things in perspective, innit? It's only a book at the end of the day, you know.
Yeah. I think that's all the questions I have for you, unless there's anything else that you want to tell us about.
No, that's been great. Thank you, Donna. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Before we go, would you like to just tell everyone where they can find out more about you and your books?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon is the easiest, probably the easiest, most convenient place to buy them. The audiobooks are on Audible as well. And if you really want to use a bookshop, then rather than Amazon, then you can get the paperbacks through the Waterstones website. I think a few of the shops I've spotted them in, but probably the website's easier. Oh, and they're on Goodreads. I'm on Goodreads, and obviously Facebook and Twitter. Yeah, if anyone wants to send me a friend request, I'm on there under my name, John Nicholl. Twitter, I think I'm Nicholl06.
Yeah.
And, I think I'm on Instagram as well, although to be honest, I haven't used it for ages. So, but I'm on Facebook quite a lot.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much.
Okay.